federal judge erupted in fury, shouting for the immediate arrest of attorney Jasmine Crockett right there in the courtroom. But just 2 minutes later, the FBI barged in and cuffed him in front of everyone. Jasmine didn't shout, didn't flinch. She simply placed an envelope on the table, and everything collapsed. So, what was inside that envelope so powerful it caused an entire network of influence to come crashing down in front of the public? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your attention. It was a Tuesday morning, the sky heavy with gray clouds, and the federal courthouse in D.C. felt colder than the wind outside. Not because of the weather, but because of him. Judge Malcolm Travers entered the building like a king surveying his crumbling kingdom, his black robes trailing like a shadow of unchecked power. His eyes, sharp and sunken, scanned the room for any signs of insubordination, not justice. Thermostat at 69 degrees. Drop it to 67 now, he barked at the bailiff, not even pausing to hear a response. Without warning, he snapped at his court clerk, threatening to replace her if she didn't stop typing like a chicken pecking seed. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a stage for Trevor's daily outbursts, where the gavel served not justice, but ego. Today, Travers thought it would be another typical show, another day of unchecked power behind a robe, until he looked at the docket and saw the name Jasmine Crockett. His fingers froze mid-tap, his eyes narrowing. The woman who had once taken down a governor live on television with nothing but case law and composure. She was here in his courtroom. The man who had silenced dozens suddenly found his voice caught in his throat as the click of her heels echoed against the marble floor. The energy in the room shifted. Jasmine Crockett had arrived. No theatrics, no entourage, just presence. She stood tall in a charcoal suit, eyes sharp, jaw steady, completely unbothered by the man gripping the gavel. Her client, Eleanor Haynes, sat quietly beside her, a retired nurse who had spent her final working years building shelters for homeless women. She was charged with financial fraud, accused of misusing donations, though every record pointed to transparency. A woman who had given everything, now on trial not for what she did but for what she believed. Jasmine wasn't here to defend her. She was here to expose the setup. But Judge Travers didn't see a defense attorney walk through his door. He saw a challenge, a disruption. A black woman with a sharp mind and a national reputation. Something he had always treated with disdain, not respect. He leaned back in his chair, the practiced smugness of a man too accustomed to having the final word on display. His eyes scanned Jasmine from head to toe, and then he delivered the first strike. Not with evidence or legal argument, but with a smirk and a sentence drenched in arrogance. This is the Attorney General they sent to make a scene. A loudmouth in heels, thinking she can turn a fraud case into a race protest, he said loudly, as though he wanted everyone in the room to hear. His words felt like a slap, sharp, intentional, humiliating. He then looked her dead in the eyes and said, without trying to hide the insult, "You walk in here acting like the law belongs to you. Just because you're black and bold, we all have to bow. You're not justice, Miss Crockett. You're just another activist pretending to be a lawyer." Silence fell across the room, like a curtain dropping. A few quiet coughs, the rustle of papers. Even the prosecutor paused in mid-scribble. The words hung in the air. Ugly, unmistakable. And Travers just leaned back, satisfied. To him, it was just another move, another way to assert dominance and let everyone know who held the gavel and who didn't. But Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. She didn't let his words take hold. Instead, she stepped forward, just one pace. And when she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, precise, like the click of a lock before a vault opens. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, "I'm not here to parade anything. I'm here because a woman who has dedicated her life to serving others is being accused of a crime she didn't commit. And someone needs to speak the truth in this room, even if it's inconvenient." Her eyes didn't waver. Her posture didn't shift. She went on, "You may control this courtroom, but you don't control the law. The law belongs to the people, and I intend to use every line of it to defend my client, without apology and without fear." There was no anger in her tone, just resolve. Travers shifted slightly, his smirk fading at the edges. Jasmine had answered his insult with restraint, reason, and power, the kind of power that comes not from position, but from principle. In that moment, even the gallery could feel it. This wasn't going to be a normal trial. It was going to be a reckoning. The insult had barely finished echoing off the marble walls when Jasmine moved. No hesitation, no reaction, just pure focus. She calmly reached into her leather briefcase, flipped the latch with a soft click, and pulled out a navy blue binder marked with a silver tab. Exhibit A. The gallery leaned in. Even the prosecutor paused in mid-scribble. Jasmine stepped to the center of the courtroom and laid the binder gently on the evidence table, as though she were placing a scalpel on an operating tray, ready to cut away the lies. "These," she began, her voice deliberate but controlled, "are the complete financial records for the Eleanor Haynes Foundation. 7 years of banking history, including quarterly reports, 501c3 filings, grant documentation, and expense breakdowns." She opened the binder slowly, revealing page after page of printed statements, color-coded, time-stamped, notarized. Each transaction tracked, each donation sourced, and every penny had gone directly toward shelter, food, clothing, and healthcare. She looked up, not at the jury, not at the prosecutor, but directly at Judge Travers. "There is no fraud here, Your Honor," she said evenly. "There is no deception. There is only the work of a woman who dedicated her life to helping others and is now being prosecuted for doing too much good in a system that punishes the wrong people." Just as Jasmine let the final page fall into place, barely a breath passed before the attack came. Predictable, premeditated. "Objection!" Prosecutor Langley shot to his feet like a spring-loaded trap, his voice rising just enough to sound urgent, but not frantic. "These documents were not submitted during discovery, Your Honor. We have no record of this audit, no notification, no timeline for verification. This is a blatant ambush." He waved his hand toward the binder on the table, as if it were contraband, not federal paperwork stamped and signed. "We move to strike the entire exhibit as inadmissible and prejudicial." Jasmine didn't budge. Her hands remained steady on the binder, her eyes calmly tracking every word. But she knew exactly what this was: a rehearsed play, a two-person routine. Because almost on cue, Judge Travers leaned forward, wearing the same self-satisfied look he had since the moment she entered his court. "Well," he drawled, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "isn't this interesting?" He narrowed his eyes at Jasmine, like a school principal catching a student with a cheat sheet. "Miss Crockett, are you seriously presenting new evidence in my courtroom? Evidence the prosecution hasn't reviewed, wasn't aware of, and now can't cross-examine? This audit magically appears today, during opening proceedings." His voice sharpened. "This feels like more than a clerical error." The word calculated hung in the air like smoke after a shot. "You're trying to slide this in under the wire, aren't you?" A beat passed. Silence. "This is manipulation," he continued, now louder, addressing the courtroom more than Jasmine. "A strategic delay, a deliberate stunt to throw off the integrity of this process. And frankly, I'm not inclined to let this circus act continue." The words hit hard not just for what they accused, but for what they implied. That Jasmine, a decorated legal expert, had no right to be trusted, that her preparation, her evidence, her position meant nothing if a judge chose not to see it. And in that moment, it became painfully clear, the rules here were whatever Travers decided they were. But Jasmine didn't back down. Not now, not after being accused of deception in a courtroom built on double standards. She reached calmly into her case folder, pulled out a smaller document protector, and held it up for the court to see. A time-stamped delivery receipt. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but controlled, "this audit was submitted to the clerk's office on March 15th at 9:47 a.m. This is the signed confirmation your clerk received it, your office logged it, and I have a certified copy right here." She walked it over to the evidence table with the steady grace of someone who had been in rooms where the truth was the only weapon she had. "Page 47 of the discovery file," she continued, "labeled, indexed, and submitted within deadline. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The paper said enough. But Trevor's face tightened. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench, his jaw clenching with something dangerously close to panic, disguised as authority. "That's irrelevant," he snapped. "I don't recall reviewing it, and if I didn't see it, it doesn't exist in this courtroom." His voice rose, echoing through the chamber. "Let me make something crystal clear, Miss Crockett. I decide what evidence is allowed. Not you, not the clerk, not this piece of paper." He pointed a shaking finger at the document she had just submitted. "You don't walk into my courtroom and tell me what's admissible. I am the judge. I am the law here." And just like that, the illusion shattered. This wasn't justice. This was ego in a robe, furious that someone had dared to beat him at his own rigged game. The courtroom air had grown so thick it pressed against the chest like a weight. But Jasmine didn't blink. She stood tall, voice unwavering, hands resting on the evidence binder like it was anchored to truth itself. "Your Honor," she began, calm and deliberate, "under Federal Rule of Evidence 902, certified financial records, when properly prepared and documented, do not require a witness to testify to their accuracy. These documents are considered self-authenticating if created in the normal course of business and accompanied by a signed declaration from a qualified accountant. They are accepted as valid without further challenge. This audit meets every requirement of that rule. This wasn't grandstanding. It was procedure. It was law. And in a courtroom where power had often outweighed principle, the rules were meant to be the last remaining anchor of fairness. But Judge Travers didn't take it that way. He leaned forward, like a coiled wire snapping loose. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you seriously standing there quoting rules to me?" His laugh was short, sharp, bitter. "Let me get this straight. You walk into my courtroom, toss some paperwork on my desk, and then have the nerve to instruct me on federal procedure?" His eyes narrowed, lips curling into something more venomous than a smirk. "You think just because you can recite a few numbers out of the evidence code, you're going?" He wasn't merely irritated. He was offended, not by the law itself, but by who was speaking it. A black woman, a defense attorney, someone who refused to defer, who refused to shrink. "You dare lecture me about how my courtroom functions?" Travers growled, now standing halfway out of his seat. "I've been wearing this robe since you were still learning how to format footnotes. I don't need a crash course from someone who just graduated law school with a shiny title and something to prove." The insult cut deeper than procedure. It wasn't about the rule. It was about silencing the person citing it. The message was clear. You don't belong here. Not with your voice, not with your confidence, not with your truth. For the first time, even the jury began to shift uncomfortably, because they weren't watching a fair trial anymore. They were watching a man unravel. Tension hung thick in the room, yet Jasmine remained still, composed, deliberate, untouchable. The storm of accusations had been swirling around her, but now, she quietly turned the tide with a single step forward. She set a black evidence folder on the table, its thin spine pressed flat against the polished wood. No raised voice, no dramatic gesture, just timing and truth. "Before the court proceeds," she said calmly, her words slicing through the silence like a scalpel through silk, "there is one further matter concerning the impartiality of these proceedings." The gallery leaned forward. Travers narrowed his eyes. Last night, at 9:17 p.m., security cameras recorded Judge Travers entering the Liberty Building parking garage, third floor southeast stairwell entrance. At 9:21 p.m., footage shows Prosecutor Daniel Langley arriving 90 seconds later. Charles Heron joined them. The three remained there for 7 minutes. No reaction came from the bench. None was needed. The room seemed tense in his place. Jasmine opened the folder slowly. The first image showed the silver Lexus SUV door ajar. The next, a grainy but unmistakable photo of all three men standing close, angled away from the camera. One frame later, Langley checking his watch, Heron glancing over his shoulder. Each photo stamped with time, date, and camera ID. Not theory, proof. She turned the page, revealing a printed restaurant receipt from 10:43 p.m., listing 3 entrees, 1 bottle of Syrah, and a signed tip line. The venue, Lardin Noir, located 2 blocks from the garage. On the following page, a GPS activity report tracked Heron's phone from his office to the garage, to the restaurant and back again, with coordinates and timestamps matched to cell tower data. The phone had pinged within 12 feet of Trevor's car at the exact time the camera footage placed them together. None of it was speculative, none circumstantial. It was cross-verified, time-aligned, and already filed into evidence before the hearing began. These records, Jasmine stated, her voice even but unmistakably pointed, were obtained through subpoena and reviewed by a third-party forensic analyst. Their authenticity is not in dispute. She placed the documents neatly on the court's evidence display. This is not conjecture. This is chain of custody, verified surveillance, geolocation data, and financial records linking a sitting judge, a lead prosecutor, and a registered federal lobbyist the night before a trial. The silence that followed was not stunned recognition. It was recognition of what it meant, of what it suggested, of how far the rot might run beneath the surface. As the last page of evidence landed on the display, something in Judge Trevor's cracked. His composure shattered, not with a whisper, but a roar. He surged forward behind the bench, face flushed deep crimson, his voice breaking through the tense silence like a siren. "This is outrageous," he shouted, the words echoing louder than his gavel ever could. "This is harassment, an attack on the federal judiciary." He pointed at Jasmine with a trembling hand, as if casting blame could erase what had just been laid bare. "Remove her now." His voice cracked mid-sentence. "This is judicial intimidation. She will be held in contempt, charged with obstruction, possibly even federal crimes. Do it." The courtroom officers near the rear doors didn't move. Not one. 2 bailiffs, usually swift to act on the judge's commands, remained frozen in place. One looked at the other, unsure. The second glanced toward the evidence screen, still showing the judge's late-night meeting, and then to Jasmine, who stood calm, resolute, unshaken. No one reached for a radio. No one stepped forward. It wasn't defiance. It was hesitation, doubt. The kind that crawls in when something feels wrong, deeply, unmistakably wrong. Trevor's voice grew shrill, losing its practiced edge. "Did you not hear me?" he barked. "I said remove her. Clear this courtroom if you have to." His hands slammed the bench again, harder this time, but the sound felt hollow now. The power behind it had drained. Authority, once automatic, now required begging. Still nothing. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The documents had done it for her. The judge's panic was speaking louder than any objection ever could. And in that moment, every soul in that room, the jury, the clerk, even the prosecution, understood the shift. The man who had ruled with fear was now ruled by it. The room was frozen. Judge Travers had shouted, slammed his hand, barked orders, but no one moved. The jury stared. The gallery sat in stunned silence. Even the court officer stood still, unsure. The power he once held over the room had vanished. Then, Jasmine moved slowly, calmly. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a clean white envelope. On the corner was a dark blue seal. Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Courts. Everyone in the room recognized it the moment that seal appeared. The air shifted again. He wasn't just being challenged. He was being investigated. Jasmine placed the envelope on the evidence table. "This," she said clearly, "is an official document from the Office of the Inspector General." Her voice was steady and serious. "It confirms a federal investigation into this courtroom, specifically Judge Travers." Travers didn't speak. He stared at the envelope, as though it might burn through the wood. Jasmine carefully opened it and held up the first page. It was titled Formal Notice of Investigation, Misconduct in the Judiciary. She read aloud. "The judge is under review for abuse of power, interference with legal evidence, and secret meetings with prosecutors and lobbyists. This includes conduct connected to the trial of Eleanor Haynes." The gallery stirred. One juror covered her mouth. Another shifted in his seat, But Jasmine wasn't done. She continued, "The investigation already includes audio recordings, court file irregularities, and private emails that raise serious concerns. Staff from this courthouse have already been contacted. The Department of Justice has been notified. The case is no longer just about one defendant. It's about how many others might have been harmed by this courtroom." She placed the pages down next to the photos, the GPS logs, and the receipt. The evidence pile was no longer just a defense, it was a map leading straight to corruption. Judge Travers didn't slam the gavel. He didn't say a word, because the robe no longer protected him. And everyone in that room, the jury, staff, officers, even the gallery, could feel it. The judge was no longer judging, he was being judged. The weight of the envelope still hung in the air when the color drained from Trevor's face. His jaw clenched, nostrils flaring, eyes darting from the Inspector General's seal to the pile of evidence now stacked neatly before him. His voice came out unsteady, hoarse. "This is outrageous," he stammered, his eyes flicking to the court officers, then back to Jasmine. "Judicial immunity applies here. I am a sitting federal judge. I have the full protection of the law. I cannot be investigated like this, not for my rulings." The words came faster now, as if he were trying to outrun what had already been exposed. "This is a violation of Article 3 authority. I'm protected under the doctrine of judicial independence. This entire display is illegal." He pounded the bench with the flat of his palm, a weak echo of the gavel's former power. "I demand immediate dismissal of these accusations. I demand representation. I demand that this courtroom remember who is in charge." But the room remained still. There was no rescue coming. Not from the clerk, not from the prosecutor, not from the guards who stood like statues, watching the unraveling. Then Jasmine stepped forward. Not quickly, not forcefully, just steadily, like gravity answering panic with purpose. "Judicial immunity," she said, her voice firm but controlled, "was never meant to shield criminal behavior. It protects honest rulings, not secret deals, not falsified records, not backroom meetings with federal prosecutors and private lobbyists." Her words hit harder than any objection. They weren't legal theory, they were fact. Cold, plain, undeniable. She continued, "Immunity does not cover threats made to silence court staff. It does not cover the illegal sealing of evidence to protect political allies. It does not cover using the bench as a weapon against those without power. And it certainly does not protect a judge who turns the courtroom into a personal tool for revenge." She took one last step toward the bench. "When a judge becomes the very thing the system was designed to prevent," she said, her voice now quiet but sharper than ever, "then the law is not obligated to protect that robe. Because at that point, there is no justice left, only the illusion of it." And as the words settled over the room, the illusion began to die. Everyone knew it, even Travers. The silence that followed Jasmine's statement about judicial limits had an edge to it, sharp, waiting, electric. But she didn't let it settle for long. Without raising her voice, she reached into her case folder once more and retrieved a clear plastic pouch. Inside, a small black USB drive, no label, just purpose. "Your Honor," she said, walking slowly toward the court technician's desk. "The court has heard argument, testimony, and seen visual documentation. But now, it will hear the judge himself." Her tone never wavered, cool, precise, impossible to interrupt. "Exhibit D is a recording obtained through a lawful internal audit, dated March 12, 7:14 p.m., from the judge's own chambers. The voice on this file belongs to Judge Malcolm Travers, addressing his court clerk in private." The technician inserted the drive. The speakers hummed to life, and then his voice. "This file never existed. You understand me? You delete it tonight. I don't care what's in the system or who asked for it. It goes away. If this leaks, the case falls apart. But more than that, so do you. You'll be out of a job before the weekend. Think about that before making a mistake." A few gasps escaped the gallery. A juror shifted forward. Even Prosecutor Langley's pen stopped mid-stroke. But it wasn't the courtroom that reacted first. It was the woman seated at the clerk's desk, her hands trembling in her lap. The room turned toward her just as her shoulders began to shake. Her lips parted, trying to form words, but only breath came. Then the tears followed, quiet at first, then harder. She stood slowly, as if it took everything she had to lift herself from the chair. "I didn't want to," she said through tears. "He told me I'd never work again if I didn't erase it. He said he'd ruin my name, that no one would believe me anyway." She covered her mouth, her voice cracking. "I thought if I just followed orders, maybe it would go away. But it didn't. It only got worse." Her voice broke again. "It wasn't just this case," she whispered. "He's done it before. I kept the notes, but I didn't know who to give them to." The audio had stopped. The clerk's sobs had quieted. Every piece of evidence, surveillance footage, GPS logs, sworn letters, everything, even the sound of Trevor's threatening to erase justice, now sat in the open like debris after a collapse. The courtroom had become still, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that comes when a storm has passed and the wreckage stands exposed. The judge's fingers trembled as they gripped the edge of the bench. His eyes were locked on the folder in front of him, but he wasn't seeing it. Then, all at once, he snapped. "I am the law!" Trevor's roared, his voice tearing through the courtroom like a gunshot. He slammed both fists against the hardwood bench, the crack of impact startling but not commanding. "Not anymore. This courtroom obeys me. These walls exist because I say they do. You don't come in here and tell me what justice is." His face was red, his breath ragged, chest heaving as though each word cost him oxygen. The gavel clattered to the floor as his arms swept wide in fury. "This is my courtroom." But the eyes around him didn't flinch. No fear, no obedience. Just the quiet gaze of people watching a man lose the one thing he had always used to define himself: power. His gaze shifted wildly, first to the jury, who now looked not at a judge, but at a man unraveling, then to the gallery, where reporters sat frozen. Pens down, phones no longer hidden. The officers by the exit remained still, unmoving, unreadable. His eyes lingered on Jasmine for a fraction of a second, then flinched away as if her mere presence scorched what was left of his authority. And then something in him changed. The shouting stopped. His shoulders slumped slightly, and his head tilted, not in surrender, but in disorientation. His eyes began to drift, unfocused, not scanning for control anymore, but for explanation, as if he were looking for someone to remind him how things had slipped so far. But no one moved, no one answered. The silence in the room was no longer tense. It was final. It wasn't the silence of fear, shock, or even satisfaction. It was the silence of recognition, the kind that comes when an entire room realizes, without needing to say it aloud, that a chapter has ended. Trevor's had ruled this courtroom with arrogance for years, but now the courtroom ruled him with silence. And in that silence, his legacy collapsed. Not with a gavel, but with a whisper. He no longer controlled the room. The stillness was different now, heavier, final. And then, at exactly 11:32 a.m., it broke. Not with noise, but with movement. The double doors at the rear of the courtroom eased open. Not kicked, not slammed, just opened quietly, deliberately. For figures in dark suits stepped through, flanking both sides of the central aisle. Their posture didn't suggest panic or drama. It suggested control. No one needed to ask who they were. The FBI had arrived. They didn't shout, they didn't need to. Every eye in the room turned as the agents moved forward with calm precision. Their presence sliced through the tension like a scalpel, each step echoing in the chamber with eerie clarity. Heels on marble, synchronized like a verdict marching toward the bench. They wore discreet vests under well-cut jackets and holstered sidearms that never had to be drawn. The seal of the Department of Justice gleamed faintly on their clipped badge wallets, which remained visible, not flashed, not waved, just there. The lead agent, mid-50s, lean, composed, with the expression of someone who had seen this moment unfold across 100 rooms, approached the bench. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked inevitable, turning slightly so the whole room could hear. He delivered the words with the cold clarity of law. "Judge Malcolm Travers," he said, "by order of the United States Department of Justice, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, destruction of federal court records, and conspiracy to subvert judicial proceedings." The courtroom didn't gasp, it exhaled. Travers didn't respond. His mouth twitched, as if searching for a sentence that never came. His hands, once slammed down in fury, now hung limply at his sides. The color drained from his face, leaving it pale and distant. His eyes darted not with defiance, but with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not to him. But it was. The lead agent stepped closer, producing a pair of steel cuffs from his belt. One of the bailiffs, previously frozen in place, now moved instinctively to step aside. There was no resistance, no last word, no dramatic lunge. Just the quiet click of metal locking around wrists that once pointed with unchecked authority from the bench. The symbol of law had been removed from behind the bench and was now standing in handcuffs in front of it. The cuffs were locked, but Travers couldn't accept it. The reality hadn't caught up to his ego. As the FBI agents began guiding him away from the bench, his throne, his fortress, he snapped. Not with grace, not with dignity, but with a fury born of disbelief. He yanked against the grip of the agent holding his right arm, twisted his body with a strength that came from panic, not purpose, and turned back toward the courtroom with a face twisted in red desperation. "I have friends in Congress," he bellowed, his voice cracking raw. "You think this is over? I've made calls from that bench. You couldn't begin to understand. You people are playing a dangerous game." His eyes scanned the jury, the press row, the stunned faces in the gallery, as if searching for an ally. There were none. "They'll come for you," he warned, now speaking to no one in particular. "You think you've won something? You think this is justice? You'll pay for this. Every last one of you will pay." The courtroom didn't erupt, didn't flinch. It simply observed. It watched a man unravel publicly. A man who had once silenced rooms with a glance, now unable to silence even himself. The officers didn't respond. The jury didn't blink. The bailiffs didn't move. The spell was broken, and Travers was the only one who hadn't realized it yet. But Jasmine had. She didn't react to the outburst. She didn't argue. She didn't shout back. She simply stepped forward, slow, steady, without theatrics. Her presence carried weight, not volume. She locked eyes with the man who had spent years hiding behind procedure, weaponizing his position, and wearing the robe like armor. And then she spoke. Her voice was low, almost soft, but it carried through the courtroom with chilling clarity. "You destroyed yourself a long time ago," she said, her tone stripped of malice, rich with truth. "I didn't bring you down. You did that. Every time you silenced a witness, buried a case, or bent the rules to protect yourself." She took one more breath, measured, steady. "All I did was shine a light on the darkness you created." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was absolute. The kind of silence only truth can carve. The agents resumed their motion. Travers didn't speak again. Not because he was gagged, but because there was nothing left to say. As he was led out of the courtroom he had once ruled, the sound of his own footsteps, no longer echoed by fear, was the only thing left trailing behind him. As Judge Travers was escorted down the narrow corridor behind Courtroom 4A, his steps unsteady, his face pale and slack with disbelief, he had no idea the fall he triggered wasn't his alone. The rod had run deeper, and the system had been quietly preparing for this moment. At exactly 11:32 a.m. Eastern Time, just as the steel cuffs locked around Travers' wrists, the same silence fell in 7 other federal courthouses across the nation, not from fear, but from revelation. In each one, doors opened without warning. Armed agents entered with sealed warrants. Gag orders were in place. Each move was rehearsed, each target tracked to the minute. In Columbus, Ohio, Judge Marion Kent was pulled from her chambers while reviewing a case file. Her clerk tried to speak, but the agent had already produced the badge. "Federal warrant. Step away from the desk." In Phoenix, Judge Richard Eldridge was taken straight from the jet bridge after returning from a judicial conference in Aspen. His suitcase contained unfiled sealed documents that later matched names found on Trevor's encrypted communications. In Atlanta, Judge Paul Whitmore, whose rulings had mysteriously favored the same 3 corporate defendants for 2 years, was removed from the bench in front of a half-filled courtroom. He never saw it coming. The moment he turned to issue a ruling, he was met by 2 agents walking up the center aisle. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the judge, the man behind the robe, stood but didn't run. He simply asked, "Is this public?" before being told, "It will be in 20 minutes. In Dallas, Pittsburgh, Flagstaff, and Savannah, the scenes varied slightly, but the result was the same. The illusion of untouchable power shattered quietly, precisely, and without warning. The operation had been planned with military precision under the code name Black Robe, led by the Department of Justice's Internal Corruption Division. It tracked encrypted communications, travel records, sealed file patterns, and unusual dismissal trends across dozens of jurisdictions. It wasn't just about favors or phone calls. It was about intentional sabotage of the justice system by those sworn to protect it. Many of the judges had been under silent observation for months. Jasmine's courtroom had become the spark, but the fire had been building. The final go order had come just 72 hours earlier, once Trevor's voice was confirmed on the tape, ordering the deletion of federal records. The connection between him and the others, once whispered in legal circles, was now written into federal affidavits. Back in Washington, the courtroom gallery lit up, not with chaos, but with real-time awareness. Phones vibrated. News alerts popped. Screens flashed with breaking headlines. 7 federal judges arrested in DOJ sweep tied to judicial conspiracy. Coordinated raids uncover widespread evidence tampering. DOJ targets shadow network of rogue federal judges. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched because everyone in that room understood this wasn't just a corruption case. This was the eruption of something long buried. And though Trevor's had been the face of the arrogance, the robe, the rage, it was never the whole machine. Now, one by one, the machine was being dismantled. Quietly, swiftly, permanently. The dust from the arrests hadn't even settled when, the following morning, the final chapter in Ella Lehner Haynes' story reached its long-awaited conclusion. It wasn't splashed across breaking news banners or shouted by reporters. It happened quietly, but with the weight of justice finally restored. The courtroom was different now. Lighter somehow, cleaner. The stain of Trevor's arrogance had been scrubbed away, physically and symbolically. A new judge now presided, one who had no ties to the old network, no interest in spectacle. He had reviewed the evidence with fresh eyes, evidence that had once been buried under sealed orders and threats. Jasmine stood beside Ella Lehner at the defense table, her expression unreadable, but her eyes locked on the bench. Then came the words, "Mrs. Haynes, on all charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction, this court finds you not guilty." There was no applause, no cheers, just a silence that felt like a held breath finally being released after months of suffocation. Ella Lehner didn't speak. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She simply closed them, shoulders rising slowly with one long breath, as if letting go of a weight no one else could see. The courtroom had once been a place of power, but now it was something else entirely. Where she had been vilified, today it became the place where she was restored. The judge offered no grand gestures in his ruling, only a brief, respectful nod and an acknowledgement that no further legal action would be pursued against her. Her case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be brought again. But what followed was the part that no court could manufacture. When Ella Lehner stepped outside, blinking into the sunlight, the courthouse steps weren't filled with media frenzy, but with life. Dozens of women she had once helped through shelters, job programs, and late-night crisis calls were waiting. Many held signs, some brought flowers, and others simply stood there with their hands over their hearts, tears in their eyes. It wasn't a protest. It was a homecoming. One young woman stepped forward first. "You gave me a place to sleep when I had nowhere to go," she said, her voice trembling. And now we're here to hold you up, like you held all of us." Others followed, some with children at their sides, some with walking sticks, others wearing the very uniforms Ella Lehner's charity had helped provide through employment reentry programs. The crowd parted for her, and Ella Lehner, still in the same conservative suit she had worn since the trial began, walked slowly down the steps. Jasmine stayed a step behind, not to lead but to support. Microphones were thrust forward, cameras snapped rapidly, but Ella Lehner didn't stop for the press. She stopped for the people. "I'm not going back to how things were," she said softly. "I'm going forward, stronger." Then something extraordinary happened. The women formed a circle around her. Not to block her, not to shield her, but to walk with her shoulder to shoulder. The community that had once watched her be torn down now refused to let her walk alone. Jasmine followed quietly, her face calm, her expression unreadable to the press. But behind her eyes, there was something deeper. The knowledge that truth, no matter how long it takes, can still prevail. In that moment, justice didn't look like a gavel or a judge's robe. It looked like a woman walking back into the world she helped heal, with the people she saved now standing guard over her freedom. While the nation reeled from the collapse of a judicial empire and Ella Lehner Haynes was welcomed back by the very people she once rescued, Jasmine Crockett vanished from the story, not to hide, not out of fear, but because her job was never about fame. While networks scrambled to book her for exclusives and morning shows opened with graphics calling her the woman who toppled the robes, she turned off her phone, closed her briefcase, and slipped out of the city before sunrise. She didn't go to Washington. She didn't go home. She went south. 2 days later, on a quiet gravel road outside Lynchburg, Virginia, Jasmine walked into a courtroom without microphones, without media, and without a single person recognizing her name. The only camera in the building was broken. The flag in the corner hung limp above a dusty file cabinet. The man sitting across from her, Clarence Rayburn, 62, a retired Army mechanic with 3 herniated discs and a bronze star in a shoebox, could barely meet her eyes. He had been fighting for months to prevent a forced foreclosure on the house he had lived in since 1980, the house he built with his own hands, the house where he buried his wife's dog beneath the oak tree and hung every grandchild's Christmas ornament with a thumbtack into the old pinewood panels. The foreclosure order cited chronic code violations, but none of them made sense. Peeling paint, a cracked step, leaves, and a clogged gutter. Then came the letter from the city. The home was within a redevelopment zone. Clarence was not. Jasmine sat across from him in the tiny office of a local legal aid clinic, files spread out across a scratched folding table. Her voice never rose. Her hands moved with precision. She flipped through building code citations, then cross-referenced the city council voting records. Her eyes narrowed. The same board member who authorized the code enforcements had direct investments in a corporate redevelopment group bidding for Clarence's entire block. She didn't curse. She didn't smile. She just said, "They tried to make it look clean, but it's dirty." Clarence looked up for the first time. "I'm just tired, ma'am," he said, his voice roughened by years of diesel fumes and quiet defeats. "I served my country. I paid off that house. Now they're saying I'm in the way." "You're not," she said. She rose from her chair, her blazer wrinkled from travel, her hair pulled back in a simple twist. She looked nothing like the legal warrior from the headlines. There were no aides, no cameras, no applause, yet in that moment, she stood taller than she ever had behind a podium. "I'm filing an emergency injunction this afternoon," she said. "Then we bring in the council records, the developer documents, and subpoena the zoning committee. We push this back into the daylight." Clarence blinked. "They said no one would fight this hard for me. They were wrong." And as the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead and rain tapped the courthouse windows, Jasmine Crockett began another quiet war against the next quiet injustice. No fanfare, no stage, just a veteran, a home, and one woman who still believed the law could be a sword, not just a shield. While Jasmine Crockett moved with urgency, cutting through layers of deceit and demanding accountability in real time, history offers a chilling reminder of what happens when no one dares to move at all. The corruption she exposed in a matter of weeks echoed something very real. something that had festered for nearly 10 years behind the mahogany walls of a courtroom in New Orleans. The name was Thomas Porteous, a federal judge whose position on the bench came with lifetime tenure, prestige, and virtually untouchable power, hid behind a title that concealed his deep involvement in judicial corruption. He accepted envelopes of cash from lawyers who appeared before him, indulged in lavish meals, hotel stays, and under-the-table deals from bail bondsmen and defense attorneys. He filed for bankruptcy under an assumed name to conceal his assets, and consistently ruled in favor of those who paid him, not merely in theory but in practice. The signs were evident. The FBI launched an investigation in 2002. Witnesses whispered, attorneys raised suspicions, and journalists hinted, but no one stepped forward. Why? Because, unlike in Jasmine's courtroom, the system surrounding Porteous wasn't broken. It was complicit. Through inaction, his fellow judges kept silent, prosecutors delayed, and the people working within the court knew that speaking out would mean career suicide. For 8 years, Porteous remained on the bench, issuing decisions in federal cases, divorce settlements, corporate litigation, and criminal appeals, while his ethical violations accumulated behind closed doors. A judicial complaint was eventually escalated in 2007, and in 2008, Congress began proceedings. In 2010, he was formally impeached by the House, becoming only the 8th federal judge in U.S. history to be removed from office by the Senate. But by then, the damage was irreversible. Dozens of rulings were cast into doubt. Litigants who had trusted the federal process were left without recourse. And perhaps most devastating of all, the silence that protected Porteous sent a message to the public that corruption could sit in a black robe, sign legal orders, and walk into court every morning without facing consequences if the system chose to look the other way. That was the world Jasmine refused to accept. She didn't wait for committees, she didn't wait for the media to catch on, and she didn't wait until it was politically safe. She followed the evidence, exposed it under oath, and stood in the line of fire, fully aware that challenging a federal judge meant risking not only professional backlash but personal ruin. And she did it anyway because history had already shown what happens when action is delayed. It looks like a decade of quiet corruption, rotting a system from the inside out while decent people wait for someone else to act. Porteous may have been removed from the bench, but his shadow still loomed in sealed records, unanswered questions, and in the lives of those he harmed. Jasmine's stand wasn't just about justice, it was a warning. In a system built to protect power, silence is the most dangerous ally corruption has, and the only thing more powerful than that silence is the moment someone dares to break it. In the wake of history, silence, and the ghosts of too many closed doors, Jasmine Crockett became more than just a defense attorney. She became a living symbol of principled resistance, not in the way statues are erected or streets renamed, but in the quiet, dangerous, high-stakes space where real justice lives or dies. The courtroom, where power sharpens into cruelty. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood, and that alone changed everything. She didn't ask for the moment. She walked into it, fully aware that confronting a federal judge wasn't just professionally risky, it was personally perilous. But she also understood the cost of silence, how the system had been designed to outlast outrage, to drown dissent in procedure and bureaucracy. Still, she stood, unbending, unshaken, undeniable. In that moment, she echoed the spirit of Rosa Parks, not through slogans or marches, but through presence. Parks didn't spark a revolution by shouting. She did it by refusing to move. Jasmine didn't ignite justice by storming the court. She did it by refusing to back down when the law itself was being twisted by the very man sworn to uphold it. The setting had changed. This time, it wasn't a bus seat in Montgomery. It was a bench in a federal court, where a black woman dared to challenge the very architecture of judicial abuse. She didn't just sit in defiance. She stood in defiance, standing against centuries of expectation, standing against the condescension coded into every phrase hurled at her by Judge Trevors, standing in the face of a courtroom where everything, from language to hierarchy, was designed to make her feel like she didn't belong. Yet, she commanded the space like it was built for her. The impact wasn't immediate. There were no headlines or political praise. It was something far more powerful. The realization etched into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. Justice is not polite, it is not passive, and it is not always sanctioned by those in power. Sometimes, justice arrives in the form of a black woman, standing calm in the storm, refusing to let the truth be buried under robes and rulings. In doing so, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a case. She redefined what courage looks like in the 21st century. Not a symbol, but a force. A Rosa Parks with legal filings and a voice steady enough to rattle the bones of a corrupted system. All the arrests, trials, and revelations had laid bare a fundamental truth. A single, unwavering stand can dismantle an empire of silence. Yet, when the dust settled and the gavel finally fell, a deeper question remained. One that stretched far beyond Judge Trevor's, beyond the network of corrupt officials, and even beyond Jasmine's unrelenting resolve. What was the human lesson to be carried forward after all this? What moral light could guide others through future storms, ensuring that the sacrifices made in this battle would not be forgotten? That was the final piece of the story, the message of resilience and courage drawn from every risk taken, every truth exposed, and every quiet voice that refused to be silenced. In a world where injustice often feels monolithic, this entire saga served as a profound reminder that a system, no matter how entrenched, can still be confronted. The downfall of Judge Trevor's wasn't just the collapse of one man's tyranny. It was the demonstration that even the most towering pillars can be toppled by those willing to stand their ground. True, the corruption had flourished under layers of bureaucracy, concealed behind carefully sealed documents and the threat of retaliation. But once those walls began to crack, once the first sliver of light pierced through the darkness, the entire network crumbled in on itself. That collapse wasn't instantaneous by nature, but it became swift because brave individuals refused to flinch. Clerks who wept for their actions, community members who showed up at the courthouse, and attorneys like Jasmine, who fought not for self-interest but for principle, all converged to strip power from those who had abused it. The lesson was clear. When voices unite against injustice, the illusions of invincibility shatter. Power depends on fear to maintain its hold, and when fear is overshadowed by truth, that power begins to fracture. In that fracture lies the first real sign of hope. Eleanor Haynes, who emerged from her trial exonerated, embodied another crucial part of this story: the resilience of ordinary people who find themselves caught in extraordinary cruelty. Her ordeal highlighted how institutions can prey upon the very individuals they claim to protect. She, a quiet nurse turned activist, became a symbol of how easily good intentions can be twisted into false allegations when the powerful manipulate the narrative. But the moment her innocence was affirmed, her entire community rallied to her side. That outpouring stood as a stark contrast to the cynicism of Trevor's courtroom. Human solidarity, sparked by shared empathy, can indeed overcome entrenched bureaucracy. Eleanor stood not merely as a victim, but as a testament to the principle that no life devoted to service should be tainted by the failings of a rigged system. Her story posed a question to every witness. How many more people like Eleanor might exist, hidden in files, threatened into silence, waiting for someone to champion their cause? And by championing even one such story, an entire tide of injustice could be reversed. Through Eleanor, the narrative crystallized into a raw, human lesson. Compassion can be a powerful shield against unchecked authority. Yet for all the visible drama, the arrests, the simultaneous raids, the televised images of judges taken into custody, there was another battle waged in quieter corners, behind closed doors, where influence was bartered like currency. That quieter war was fought in the hearts and minds of those who felt powerless, from low-level clerks to community volunteers. When Jasmine stepped into that courtroom, she was, in essence, telling every hesitant onlooker that passivity is an accomplice to corruption. This moral stance resonates far beyond the legal realm. It reverberates in any place where authority is misused. Fear can be a powerful muzzle, but the moment even one person dares to question that fear, a chain reaction of moral awakening can occur. Courage, therefore, becomes contagious. The lesson is straightforward yet profound. Injustice thrives in silence. Refusing to look away can be dangerous, but turning a blind eye is what allows the danger to prosper. The parallels drawn to real-world events, such as the nearly decade-long inaction in the case of Judge Thomas Porteous, offered a chilling warning. In that historical example, the system's inertia allowed corruption to entrench itself until the damage became nearly irreversible. That cautionary tale underscored one message, repeatedly emphasized in Jasmine's narrative. Waiting for the perfect time to speak up is how injustice metastasizes. When no one is willing to take the risk and step forward, institutional decay festers until it becomes too large to ignore. It was precisely that sense of inevitability, that creeping acceptance of "it's just how things work," which allowed Trevor's network to operate without scrutiny for so long. Jasmine's refusal to wait 10 years, her refusal to be intimidated by a title or threatened by a gavel, stood in stark contrast to the silence that had once shielded Portius. The underlying principle was that a single determined individual, armed with facts and unwavering conviction, can outmaneuver even the most complex systems. This perspective didn't minimize the danger. Trevor's wielded immense power, but it demonstrated how quickly that power could erode when confronted with moral clarity. Moreover, this entire saga reaffirmed the timeless truth that unchecked power is abused power. Judge Travers embodied the arrogance that arises when a role meant for guardianship morphs into a platform for personal gain. The robe became his shield, his guise of legitimacy, and the fear he instilled in others was his greatest weapon. But once that shield cracked, the insecurities and desperation beneath were laid bare. This revelation spoke to the broader human lesson. Those who project the greatest intimidation often harbor the weakest moral foundation. Their power is sustained not by true authority, but by the submission of others. By standing firm, Jasmine dismantled the illusion that a single robe or a single bench could dictate reality without consequence. Travers learned the hard way that titles cannot protect those who betray their sworn duty. And in that learning, a system was forever changed. What once seemed invulnerable gained something it desperately needed: accountability. From a broader perspective, the events demonstrated how the collective can prevail when empowered individuals come together. The FBI raids that dismantled the network of corrupt judges were meticulously coordinated, but they were made possible because people within the system, clerks, staffers, and honest officials, provided the crucial pieces of the puzzle. Disjointed whispers became an unstoppable force when channeled through a determined advocate like Jasmine. Each new revelation acted as a spark, igniting further disclosures until the blaze of truth burned too intensely for any cover-up to contain. That synergy illuminated another vital lesson. In oppressive environments, the choice to speak out may feel solitary, but it rarely stays that way. Courage breeds courage, and truth, once revealed, spreads beyond the reach of those who tried to suppress it. The fall of Travers and his associates wasn't orchestrated by one hero alone, but by an unspoken alliance of individuals who collectively decided they would no longer partake in a lie. Jasmine's role as a modern-day Rosa Parks in the courtroom also offered a nuanced look at how activism evolves in the civil rights era. Refusing to give up a bus seat served as a catalyst for conscience. Here, in the domain of federal law, refusing to accept a judge's intimidation served a similar purpose. Both acts were seemingly simple in concept. One a quiet posture, the other a calm recitation of legal facts. Yet each shattered the complacency that allowed injustice to be disguised as normal. It was a testament to how powerful a single act of refusal can be in dismantling systemic abuse. The moral resonates across generations. Oppression, once challenged, reveals its vulnerabilities. A system designed to oppress thrives on the assumption that nobody will confront it. The moment that assumption fails, cracks begin to appear. Through Jasmine, the narrative drove home a universal lesson. Sometimes the greatest act of resistance isn't aggression, but unwavering resolve. Eleanor Haynes's story layered another human truth on top. Countless individuals remain vulnerable to the whims of authorities. Whether it's an elderly nurse wrongfully accused or a homeless mother targeted by discriminatory policies, the pattern repeats wherever those in power can exploit ignorance or fear. But Eleanor's exoneration showed that once a victim finds an ally, a voice that combines compassion and competence, the entire dynamic can shift. There is a profound lesson in how her redemption hinged on the intersection of community support and legal advocacy. Had she been alone, Travers might have succeeded in painting her as a fraud, burying her case under piles of doctor documents and sealed files. Instead, her courage to stand firm, combined with Jasmine's legal resolve, overturned the narrative. This underscored how essential it is to defend the marginalized, not from a place of paternalistic charity, but from a recognition that an attack on one innocent person is a threat to all. In the aftermath, the quiet humility of Jasmine's departure to help a wronged veteran reminded observers that justice is not a spotlight moment but a continuum. She could have basked in the glow of public adoration, turned her victory into a personal brand, or leveraged it for higher office. Instead, she slipped away to a place without cameras and set her sights on the next injustice. That decision speaks volumes about the essence of true leadership. It is not fueled by applause, but sustained by principle. The high drama of Trevor's fall would have made for a triumphant victory lap on national news, but Jasmine understood that the system's cracks remain widespread. There are more Clarence Raburns out there, people whose lives hang precariously on the edge of bureaucratic malfeasance. A single high-profile takedown can spark hope, but lasting change requires relentless pursuit of the next fight. By choosing to return to the trenches, Jasmine underscored the lesson that justice is never a one-time event, but an ongoing stance. Drawing from these threads, the moral tapestry becomes clearer. Individuals have far more power against injustice than they often realize, and institutions, no matter how imposing, can be held accountable by those who dare to demand it. True, the stakes are high. Careers can be lost, reputations smeared, lives upended. Yet the story of Jasmine, Eleanor, and the collapse of Trevor's judicial conspiracy shows that complacency is even costlier. When good people assume that stepping forward is someone else's responsibility, corruption flourishes unchecked, and entire communities suffer in its wake. But when even a handful of people decide they will no longer enable the lie, a chain reaction begins, one that can topple the mightiest structures of deception. The vulnerability of a system built on secrets lies in the fragility of its silence. And once that silence is broken, there's no turning back. At the core, there remains a sharp commentary on power and responsibility. The robe, once a symbol of noble duty, became twisted into an emblem of absolute rule under Trevor's. This distortion is a reminder that symbols mean nothing without the moral actions of those who wear them. A judge, a uniformed officer, a legislator, these titles imply public trust, but trust can be weaponized if no one questions the integrity behind it. Jasmine's confrontation served as a litmus test for a system that often shields its own. The fact that she succeeded, despite the odds, points to a vital truth. The law, when wielded ethically, can uproot the very pillars of corruption. However, it also depends on the moral courage of individuals to enforce it. Paper rules alone cannot stand against greed or intimidation. They need voices, they need hearts, they need people willing to say no more and back that conviction with action. In many ways, the downfall of Trevor's and the liberation of innocents like Eleanor mirror a timeless narrative, that of an underdog army breaching the walls of a towering fortress. The fortress, of course, is the complacent system that believes itself invulnerable. The underdog army consists of those marginalized or disregarded by that same system, galvanized by a champion who refuses to accept a rigged verdict. The struggle is epic because it touches on fundamental questions of justice, power, and moral worth. Yet this epic doesn't hinge on superpowers or dramatic showdowns. It unfolds in the quiet revelation of documents, the unwavering testimony of those once silenced, and the steadfast refusal of an attorney to cower in front of a corrupt gavel. Victory, in the end, isn't about crushing the enemy but restoring the dignity of those who were robbed of it. That is what made the entire arc both thrilling and deeply human. It resonated with every person who has ever felt powerless in the face of systemic might. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.